Want to sew the sweetest matching mommy and me dress without any of the stress, zippers, or buttons? Today, I'm going to show you how to sew the Maeve Dress by Violette Field Threads. This is a beginner-friendly dress pattern with a modern vintage vibe. Whether you are sewing for your little one, yourself, or both, this is the perfect project to start today. And what makes it even more perfect is all the patterns are free. I'm going to link in the description box below, and I will also pin it as the first comment, links to find the free pattern in anything that you'll need to complete this project. So let's head up to the sewing room and get sewing. I like to cut out my pattern and prep my pieces the day before I sew. I find it helps me to work more efficiently, and honestly, cutting out is not one of my favorite tasks, so I like to separate that from sewing. I do add a few steps into this process that aren't in the instructions. Some of them I think are just good habits, and also some of it just makes for a more efficient sew. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the pattern. They come as a printed home version, an A0 that you can send away to be printed, and there is also a projector file available. It comes in sizes girls, then there's a separate pattern for tween, and then a separate pattern for the women's size. The women's size has bust cups, which I'm so thrilled about. The largest size is 20, so the women's goes from 00 to 20, and the size 20 has 3 bust cups, A, B, C, D, and E, F. The finished measurements on the EF for the bust cup comes to 56 inches. So it's not the absolute most size inclusive, but I do fit into that size range, and I'm a plus size sewist. One of the things I love about Violette Field Threads is that they give cut measurements. So if there is a piece that is a rectangle or square, they will give you the cut measurements. So if you're printing at home, you don't have to print out all the pattern pieces. You can cut the rectangle. So in my case, I didn't print the tiers. I got my pattern measurements. Something that I do to save myself a little time and from going back and forth to the instructions is I make myself a little note of everything that I'm going to cut out that is not a pattern piece. So my bias strip, you could cut a bias strip or use ready-made bias tape. I have this sweet specky seamstress tape that I think will work really well with the fabric I've chosen. It's been sitting in my stash, and this is a good opportunity to use it. So I noted the inches that I would need, the same for my tiers, the ruffles, and my elastic. So I made myself a note. I cut all of this out, and it made it a little more efficient. Some of my prep I will talk about as I go, but one of the things I do while my pattern is still pinned to the pattern piece is I will make a little notch at the center front, both at the back of my bodice and here down at the bottom of my bodice. That will help me in attaching the center of my bias binding and finding the center of my tier. And I've done the same on the tiers. I have made a little notch so that I can line them up where they'll be attached. And you'll see that when we're constructing the garment. The thing that I do that is not mentioned is I stay stitch. Now this cotton chambray is very stable, but I think this is a good habit to get into. I start at the shoulder seam, and these are 2 separate pieces, and I sew inside the seam allowance, starting at the shoulder, go to the center and stop, and the same for this side. I'd start at the shoulder, go to the center. This helps to keep from stretching out your pieces. I've also done this in the back along the neckline. You can see here where I've done that. I have stay stitched to here, and then from here to here. That's going to add stability. It's not in the instructions. It's just a really good practice and a good habit to get into. Maybe I would not overhandle this. A beginner might, even with a sturdy fabric like this cotton. If it's rayon or something delicate, even an experienced sewist could end up misshaping this by handling it and when attaching the bias binding. The other thing I've done is I have marked my sewing lines on the front. We'll talk about that when it comes to construction, but I like to prep as much as possible so that when it's time to sew, I can just enjoy the sew. I have made all my notches, and for your benefit, instead of just snipping the notch, I extended the triangle so that it would be a little bit easier to see what I'm doing as I match up. You certainly can just do a little snip in your fabric. This little triangle is something that I drew on my pattern piece, and if it confuses you, just follow the pattern instructions. Just make sure you don't snip too far into your seam allowance. The only other prep I did, and this is something we will talk about when it comes time as to the reasons why, I have pre-pressed the hems for my sleeves and for my bottom tier. This way I was heading over to the serger and to the ironing board all at the same time, so this was more an efficiency thing and doing it now. It also gets me feeling like I'm finishing the dress so much faster. So let's start assembling. The first step is to attach the bodice front and back of the shoulder seams. Right sides together, and by right sides I mean our pretty side. So I'm going to line up the shoulders, and if you do a good job cutting out, they should line up perfectly, and I'm going to place my pins in. The seam allowance for this is a 1/2 inch. Most of what we're going to be sewing is a 1/2 inch seam allowance, with a couple of exceptions that are clearly noted in the pattern. Offhand, I'd say the exceptions are the bias binding and the finishing here at the front, but most everything is either 1/2 inch seam allowance, or they may say to edge stitch close to the fold. That's when you're hemming, but we'll go over that when we come to it. So I've pinned my shoulder seams. I'm going to go over to my sewing machine. I'm going to sew at a 1/2 inch, and then I'm going to finish these seams. I'm going to finish mine on the serger. If you don't have a serger, you're going to want to reduce the seam in half. So that means you'd sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance, trim it down in half, which would be 1/4 inch from the seam to the edge after you trimmed it, and then do a zigzag stitch or an overcast stitch if you don't have a serger. I'm sewing with a new machine after over 20 years sewing with a Viking, and I've got a Baby Lock Ballard, and I wanted to find where my 1/2 inch seam allowance was. I have on my J foot, I put my needle in the leftmost position, and according to my seam guide, I had a perfect seam allowance. But because this is a new machine, I wanted to double check. So I got out my ruler, and indeed, that is pretty darn close to 1/2 inch seam allowance. For the next step, I'm going to start stitching here from the bottom of my front bodice. You see, I have pinned it together. This is the mark that I made in my pre-planning. It goes up until the point where it starts to slightly angle. So I'm going to start from the bottom, and then I'm going to stop here where the bodice takes that little angle. That's going to form the V, and it's kind of slight, a little hard to see, which is why I did this chalk line. This is 1 inch wide, and I'm just going to start here, go up. I'm going to finish it off. Then I'm going to go to the iron, and I'll show you the next step. I've pressed it the 1 inch, and the next step is to fold the raw edge under. So you're essentially folding this in half, and you're going to form a 1/2 inch placket and give it a press. We'll pin it, and I'll meet you back here. I have pressed this in to conceal all my raw edges, and you see this is where I have joined them. The first step is we're going to sew a little rectangle. We're going to start from the lower edge here. We're going to sew up, catching this. You can do it from the wrong side or from the right side. I'd say from this side it'd be a little easier for beginners, and it's very doable to do it as a top stitch. I'm going to demonstrate it from this side since this is a tutorial for beginners. And we're going to go to this point. We're going to go up the side. This is going to be the top of our rectangle, and then we're going to come down this edge. I want to sew very close to this edge, and I'm going to try to get my stitches nice and even because you will see them on this side. I'm sewing with a navy thread, so hopefully it won't be so noticeable. After we do that, then we are going to sew from this point to this point and this point to this point to secure everything well. I've lined my presser foot with the edge of my fold here, and I've moved my needle all the way over to the right so that it will be just biting in at the edge. I'm going to go very slow because I want to stop at the join to come across. You might be able to see that I'm lining this folded edge with where the plastic and the metal meet, and it seems to be hitting exactly where I want it to hit. Now I'm going to pivot and I'm going to tie this off because I want to change my needle position. I want to go to the center because I don't want to go off. I want to be able to catch this on the join. I'm going to go slow. Now I'm going to come down this side and I'm going to move my needle back over to the right this time. I'm just going to sew this to secure it down, and from here down here, and it'll be all secure. This is coming together so fast. For the binding, I'm using this really sweet Specky Seamstress binding. You can use your own bias tape, make your own. There are instructions in the pattern. I have turned my bodice inside out. And remember, I told you I made a little notch in the back. It's well within the seam allowance, so nobody's going to see that notch. But that's going to help me line up the center of my bias tape, and you can find the center simply by folding it in half, marking it with a pin. I also made a little chalk line in pink on this side so that as I move the pin to pin it on, I can still see that I'm lining it up evenly. I'm going to be putting right side to wrong side, and I'm going to match the center of my bias tape to this little notch in the back, and I'm going to pin it all the way around, and I'm going to sew on this first fold line. And don't worry, I'll show you on the machine. Something I want to take care is to make sure that I'm putting this on right, because this is directional. I want my flowers to be growing out of the ground, so the leaves and stems here, flowers up here, because this is going to be visible from the outer. It's going to sit outside the neckline, the top of this dress. So I'm just going to give it a quick peek, make sure I've got it going in the right direction so that when it folds over, it's going to be where I want it. So I'm going to take some time. I'm going to pin this. I'm going to use loads of pins. You can use clips if you'd like. I like to use on these fiddly things, these fine glass head pins. You can iron over them. And I find when I'm pulling them out, it doesn't disturb the other pins. Sometimes when I'm pulling out these, that kind of grip, it might drag a little bit of the fabric as I'm going under the sewing machine. So I'd rather sew a little slower, pull out the pins, and I've got a better chance of success. I'll get this pinned and I'll meet you at the machine. I wanted to get in here really close so that you could see what I'm doing. I took a red friction pen, though you can see the crease here. I know I can see it. but just in case, I marked with a red friction pen that will iron out where I'm going to be sewing, which is along this first crease. Here is the edge of my neckline, and notice how nicely this lines up with the inside of my foot where the plastic meets the metal here for this outer edge, and then the line matches perfectly with my center point. So I'm going to stitch this around. I'm going to go slow. I'm going to try to do a really neat job. Pay attention to what's going on over here so that I don't get any tucks. And then we will check our work before clipping into this and finishing off the neckband. I'm just double checking that I've moved to a center stitch. It's all lined up and away we go. And I'm glad I saw that because I'm going to stop right now. I forgot that I wanted to trade my thread color out from this navy blue to a color that better matches this blue. I didn't want to get carried away and then sew it in the wrong color and be disappointed. So let me change my thread and then we'll continue. There we go, crisis averted. I've changed to a brighter blue. I'm not worried about my bobbin thread because I don't think you're gonna see that. At least I hope you won't. And let's continue as planned. Line this up. I'm starting a little bit off of the edge here just to make sure I catch everything. Let me start back a little more. There we go. That's where I want to start. And I'm just going to go slow, make sure I keep everything nice and lined up. I am making this tutorial in the month of September. This is the perfect dress for Project Dress a Girl. This is a charitable event run by my friend Maddie of Maddie Sews to dress impoverished girls around the world, and it is such a worthwhile charity. This meets all of the criteria for that. I'm going to link Maddie's video where she talks about how you can participate in this. If you don't have time to do it this year, maybe you can sew a dress for next year. I'll link that in the pinned comments and in the discussion box below, so you have all the information. The only thing you would need to do is add pockets to this, and who doesn't love pockets? Violette Field Threads does have a free pocket template and instructions on their website, so you could grab that, or you could add some patch pockets to this, and it would be a great dress for that charitable event. So I'm just going to work my way around this dress, and I'm taking my time. I'm not trying to be a speed demon. Usually necklines are not the place to try to speed. One, you could possibly stretch it out, and two, puckers and tucks. We don't want them, and you can avoid them. I am using my stylus to help keep everything lined up, especially as I pull my pins. I might need to zhuzh it a little bit, and that can get close to the needle, and I don't need to worry about sewing over a finger. I've never done that, and I don't want to ever do that. I'm also checking that my shoulder seam is going in the direction that I planned, and that's towards the back. So everything is working out really well here. I'm just taking my time, zhuzhing it as I need to, and even going what seems kind of painfully slow. I am almost halfway around. I am so tempted to speed up, but I won't. This is not my normal sewing pace, but I want to set a good example. I'm stopping. I can see there's a little bit of a wrinkle there. Smooth it out with my stylus and carry on. One of the things that really makes a garment look nicely sewn is having even stitches, not having those tucks and puckers, and sometimes it just means slowing down a little bit and paying close attention to what you're doing. Sometimes I'll listen to an audiobook while I sew if it's something I've sewn a bazillion times and I don't need to think about it. This is my first time sewing the Maeve dress. I know you're thinking you're doing a tutorial. It's the first time you've sewn it. It's a beginner-friendly pattern, and I have sewn so many Violette Field Threads patterns. I own, since they come in different sizes, and I have a teen I sew for, and I have lots of littles I sew for, and a few I bought for myself. I think I have over 50 Violette Field Threads patterns, and I know I've sewn more than a dozen. I should tally up how many of them I've actually sewn. I'll let you know at the end of the video if I remember to look it up. So I'm almost all the way through. We'll make it to the end. Again, I'm taking note that the seam is going to the back of the bodice as I've intended. Sometimes when you're sewing, things can shift around and move. One of the things that you can do is you can apply a little bit of glue and hit it with a hot iron to keep it down. I might do that before I attach the sleeve. I've got the tools. Why don't I just go ahead and use them? Smooth that out a little bit. Good practice to pull those pins out as you sew. Don't sew over the pins. All right, now's the time to tell. See how neatly we sew this. I'm gonna look from both sides. See how cute that's gonna be. I thought this blue with the blue and the flower motif I thought it would look sweet and also be an opportunity to use this. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna check this. I'm gonna give it a press, and then I'm gonna go in just barely snip, because you can see that is not a very wide seam allowance. I don't want to clip into my stitches. I don't want to weaken this, but I'm just going to snip a little bit along the curve. It seems to be folding over just fine without clipping. So I might see how it presses if I need to clip at all. I love the Specky Seamstress quality of her bias tape. It's not stiff, it's very malleable. I really think that's gonna be fine. So I'm gonna press this, I'm gonna pin it, and the next step is to sew along the folded edge to secure this. I'm gonna make sure I trim any of these little thread hairs so that they're not poking out. And then we're going to neatly finish off the end of the tie. This closed, fold it over and sew it closed all the way along so that when I sew this down, since this is really single fold bias tape, I don't think you're going to see the full flower when it comes to the ties, but I think that's going to be okay. I'm going to make it work. I'm invested in this. I think it'll be cute. If I didn't think it would be cute, I would just take it out and cut some out of this fabric. I have plenty of it. I've flipped my binding over to the front of the dress, of the bodice, and I'm going to sew along this edge to secure it. I'm going to go slow, and I'm going to make sure that I zhuzh this, move it around, make sure that it bends and neatly stitches down so that I don't have any tucks, don't have any puckers. Then after I secure it to the bodice, I'm going to finish off the ends, and I will close this and sew it neatly. One of the options they have is just to tie a knot on the end and leave it unfinished, but I like to finish off my ends, so that's what I'm going to do now. I have my light blue, bright blue thread in. I want to sew right along this edge, so I'm going to move my needle over to the left. I'm already on slowpoke speed. Go all the way to the left, and as I go, I'm going to make sure everything is sitting just right. I'm going to go slow so that this lines up perfectly right inside here so that I have nice even stitches, because this is what's going to show. I'm going to lengthen my stitch to 3 since this is more or less a top stitch, and away I go. I promised, slow as molasses. I don't want to stretch this out. That's one of the reasons why you stay stitched, is so that while you're manipulating this, you're not stretching the bodice or the bias tape out of, mostly the bodice. You're not stretching it out of whack. I'm stopping periodically, making sure that this is nice and smooth, this is smooth, it's lined up where I want it to be. Since this is a curve, you do need to adjust it periodically. You're not sewing straight pieces. I'm not watching my needle, I'm watching where the binding is in relation to the presser foot. This is a size 2, So it doesn't take as long, but also I'm working with smaller bits, smaller curves. It's a little bit of a trade-off. And like I said earlier, you'll sew this the same way, whether you're sewing the women's version, the teen version, or the girls version. Starts at size 2 toddler and goes to 10 toddler. Then you have the tweens, and then you have Mrs. 00 to 20. That's a lot of years you can get out of this one pattern. It's kind of a timeless design too. I mean, I know that the tiered dresses have been super hot for a while. Such a nice, easy breezy style to wear in the heat of summer. My little granddaughter is only 1, so that's why I'm planning on making, they call me Mina. I'm making my Mina and me outfit for the spring, because by then she should be fitting into a size 2 toddler. I have some beautiful viscose linen that I am thinking, I've ordered it, and I think that when I cut mine out, some of my offcuts will be the perfect size to get the baby's dress out of. There's very little waste when you sew for yourself and little people at the same time. It's amazing how many things I can get for either me and the kids or for my husband Charlie and the kids. The boys really love to dress in the same outfit and the same fabric as Charlie. They will go up and change if they see he's wearing something and they have the matching element to it. It started out as me just not wanting to have fabric go to waste and discovering I could make a mini version for the boys, and then it turned out to very intentional sewing because they all want to match. Love it. As long as they want to match, I am happy to sew for them. All right, we're coming to the end. I'm going to sew to here, then I'm going to finish off these ends and then turn these together to form a nice neat tie, and we will be well on our way to finishing this dress. It's a good job, if I do say so myself. I'll trim that little thread. All right, so on for finishing. They do give you instructions on how to finish. I'm just going to show you really quickly here. I will fuss a little bit with it on my own at the ironing board. I have a tutorial for finishing ends neatly. What you want to do is fold it in 1/2 inch so that raw edge is folded in. And then you're going to take this side and you're going to thread it through. Hopefully you can see side to enclose your raw edges, and it's a little easier to do when you're not trying to, there we go. I'm trying to not block your view, and then you push it in and you fold it over. It's much neater than what I'm showing you here. I have a tutorial for doing that, and I'll link it in the ends cards. It's a nice skill to have. It's something, the first time I saw it done was on a reel that Chalk and Notch had, and I thought, where have you been all my sewing years? We're ready to add the sleeves, and as I told you, part of my pre-prep, or my prep I should say, was to iron up my cuff. This is going to be the casing for my elastic. I'm going to unpin this so I can show you something. The pattern calls for it to be folded under 1/4 inch, and then you fold again 3/8 of an inch. Something that I do to save a little time is I serge this end. That is 1/4 inch. Let me show you. That is 1/4 inch. So all I have to do is go over to the ironing board and I fold it where that stitch line is, and it folds and irons so fast. If you don't have a serger, you could sew a long stitch at 1/4 inch and use that as a guide for folding up, or you can use another tool to get your 1/4 inch. So I've ironed 1/4 inch. So I pressed it up 1/4 inch and then again 3/8 inches. I hit it with a hot steamy iron and then I pinned it. The next step is attaching the sleeve to the bodice. It does not involve this casing in any way, so I'm going to leave the pins in. I'm going to bring the camera down so you can see how I do this. I've sewn my gathering stitches. So the first row of gathering stitches is inside my 1/2 inch seam allowance, and the second row is outside of that. I've used a thread that's really easy to see. I will be pulling this one out after I sew it, and I have gathered it between my 2 notches. I'll match this up, my center notch to the seam of the sleeve. This is the back and this is the front. If you get confused, or maybe you forgot to do your notches, there are a couple of ways you can remember. One is to just simply get your pattern piece out and check that you have the back and the front and know what is what. And the other is you can make a practice of, say, I always put a pin on the back side of my sleeve, and so I know this is a back, so I can work quickly. Either way it works, but definitely get your notches in. Violette Field Threads does an interesting way on these sleeves. It's not like the normal set-in sleeve where you would finish the sides and then finish these sides and put the sleeve in. This does make it beginner friendly. We are going to pin it first without gathering, and we're going to pin it right sides together. And so that means that I need to make sure that my back is meeting my back, because I'm going to be putting them right sides together. I'm going to turn it like this. Now when I pin it, I'll probably take this in my lap and work with it, but just so you can see, I will be matching up my notches. So this notch to here, and then this will be pinned to be matched. The part that is not gathered, I will pin this in place. After I have it pinned in place, then I will pull gently on my bobbin threads to gather this up, and I'll fuss with it a little bit to evenly distribute the gathers. Now the instructions said for you to cut these as mirror pieces, mirror images. That's because we want a right sleeve and a left sleeve. The easiest way to do that when you're cutting out is to have the fabric facing each other. Cut them out at the both at the same time, and you know you're going to have a right and a left. You know they're going to be mirror. If you are scrap busting, you cut out one sleeve and then you find another scrap that works the right size. Make sure you turn your pattern upside down so that you don't get 2 sleeves for the same arm. So I'm going to pin this together, and then I'll show you what it looks like after I have it all pinned and gently gathered. I have it gathered between my points, pinned, and I'm ready to sew. I did change my thread to the navy, and I moved my needle over to the left position. I'm going to do a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to sew all around this circumference of this. Take the speed up a little bit. My needle came unthreaded, it looks like. Okay, I'm going to check for tucks and puckers, see if I like my gathering. I have a little pucker right there. See if it'll steam out. If not, I will take this little section out to smooth it. But otherwise, we're good. Then I'm going to insert the next sleeve exactly like this, and then I'll meet you back. Isn't this looking sweet? I have the sleeves attached and serged for a nice finish, and now it's time to sew the sides together. There are 2 ways of doing this. There's the easy way and what they call the professional way. I think they're both easy. With the easy way, they have you insert your elastic, and so it would be coming through both sides. These are 2 pieces of elastic. They'd have you insert it on both ends, and then you simply sew up this seam and finish it off. I think the version they call the professional version is simple, easy enough to do. That's how I do all of my elastic casings, so I'm going to show you that here. We are going to sew this side seam, but we're going to unfold our casing first, and you can unfold all of it, or you can just fold by the ends, and then we are going to sew them, sew the side seam, and then with this memory crease, it'll be easy to just refold it. We will sew the case opening, and we're going to leave an opening for threading our elastic. I like to leave that in an inconspicuous spot, but I don't want to do it right near the join. There's a lot going on there. I'm going to serge it. It'll be a little lumpy. So I'm going to find a spot that's still hidden more towards the back where I'm going to leave my opening, probably here. And I'm just going to leave enough opening to thread my elastic through. There's a lot of room here. You can see I've got 3/8 of an inch. This is a 1/4 inch elastic, so that's going to be very doable. I'm going to pin my side seams, which includes the hem of this. So I'm going to pin it together. You see I am opening it all the way out. I'm going to sew this side. I'm going to serge it. Then I'm going to refold along the memory crease. I'm going to stitch it down, leaving an opening. I'll close it later. I'm going to thread through my elastic, secure the elastic, then stitch the opening. I want to give you a little sleeve tip here. I'm making the elastic case opening, and I want to be mindful of how I'm feeding the elastic through just to make it easier on myself. I don't want to try to feed the elastic through in this direction and get caught in the seam and have to fiddle with making sure I come up above it and go around. So part of my awareness in this is I'm going to glue this seam down, press it down so it's all going in the same direction. I don't want this flat here this way and then twisted and sewn in the other way. So I've got this sewing glue. If you don't have this, you can use the Elmer's washable school glue. That works fine. I do like this a little bit better, and so it's worth, I don't know, the couple dollars that it cost me to purchase it. So I've just dabbed a little bit on all the way down the seam. And then I'm going to fold it over. And I don't want to lose my memory crease, so I'll go ahead and fold it this way. See how nice and easy that wants to just fold to how I want it to go? And then I'm going to hit this with a hot, dry iron. That's going to set the glue. It's a temporary glue. Make sure I'm getting this in the frame. It's a temporary glue. It'll come out in the wash. It doesn't gum up your needle. So that's just going to keep it going this direction. When I go to thread my elastic, I'll know to leave my opening like right around here, and I'll thread it this way. I'll let this judge what direction I push it through, just for ease. And I'll also let that judge which side I leave the opening on. It's still going to be inconspicuous, and I'm going to try to do a super neat job as I sew it close along this edge. So either way, it should be fine. So that's the next step. I'm going to glue the seam down on my other sleeve. I'm going to stitch around, then I'm going to thread my elastic through, sew the ends together, stick it up in here, and then sew my opening shut. I like to sit in my comfy chair while I do these tasks like gathering. I've got my bodice right here, and here's my gathered skirt. If this were a skirt I was sewing for myself, of course I'd have a much larger piece than this. I might start one gathering stitch at the middle with a long tail and then end it at the side seam. So here's my middle, here's my side. This is smaller, so I have done a gathering stitch on the front, 2 rows, and then a gathering stitch on the back, 2 rows. I'm going to turn this inside out. When you pull your gathering stitches, it's so much easier to pull the bobbin thread because that thread's going to be looser and it's going to be easier to pull into a nice gather. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to line up my side seams with the side seams of my blouse. So this will go upside down inside the skirt I'm gathering. I've already put clips in at my quarter points, which is the seam on the front. I've made the little notch on the back, and then I have my side seams on the blouse. So that's going to go inside the skirt like so, and I'm going to pull my gathers. I think I'm going to make it smaller first just to make it more manageable. Then I'll insert this in. I'm going to start with pulling these bobbin threads. I'm very careful when I sew my gathering threads that I am not sewing over them as I do each row and also front to back. And I'm just going to start pulling on one side towards the center and gently gather, going to the center, and then I'll start from the other side. And then I won't have to hopefully do as much of the adjusting to get the fit. So I'm just going to do a little rough gather. Sometimes I over gather to begin with. I've done one side. Now I'm going to the other side. And I know I moan on about how I hate gathering. And really, this is not going to take much time to do, particularly since this is a size 2 toddler. What I find that is aggravating is I get so fussy about wanting all of these gathers to be extremely evenly distributed because it makes a big difference in how the garment looks. So sometimes I'll just say, that's good enough. I'm always disappointed when I do that. So I've done the front. Now I'll gather the back, because I have a tube here. I have a front and back to bodice. It gathers all the way around, and I'm going to do the same thing. When I'm happy with it, I'll pin it and I'll come right back to you. I have my gathers. I'm going to go over to the sewing machine. I'm going to sew it at a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around. Then I'm going to take a look at it, make sure that I like it. I don't think it's perfect, but I think I will be satisfied with how I've gathered this. If I like it, I will serge it. If I don't like it, I will unpick and zhuzh it some more. Then I'll be on for my final tier. I'm going to show you my method for gathering on the serger. Back soon. I have my first tier attached. The bottom tier is much wider than the first tier. This is 35 and a little bit inches. This one I think was around 21 inches for the first tier. So I have 2 of these. That's a lot more gathering. I'm going to gather this on my serger. I'm not going to start out in a loop. I'm going to start at one end. I'm going to change my stitch length and my differential feed, and I'm going to start 1/2 inch in. The seam allowance is 1/2 inch, so I'm going to start a 1/2 inch, and then I'm going to end a 1/2 inch on the other end. I will make a mark on my fabric so I know when to start and when to stop. I'll show you the settings when I get to the serger. You're going to love this tip. Unfortunately, I lost quite a few of my video clips for this tutorial, but I couldn't not do a do-over for my favorite way to gather. I'm going to show you on this scrap here. I have marked my imaginary seam allowances on each end. Unlike the traditional way, I don't form the tube first. I take my front piece and my back piece. I gather them on the serger separately. Then I pin them, and I will get the gathering just right, evenly distributed. Then I'll sew my tube, attach it, and sew it on. So to do it on the serger, I'm going to bring you in closer, and I'm going to show you my settings. I have already changed my thread colors for my needles. Those are the threads I'm going to pull as I gather. I have in my right needle coral, and in my left needle I have a green thread. I'm going to change my differential feed to 2. That'll pull the fabric through faster. It will gather. And then I'll pull the needle threads to gather it a little tighter if I do, and I know I will. I'm going to increase my stitch length from 2.5 to as high as my machine will go. That is 4, and I'm going to drop down my knife because I do not want to cut any of this off. So here's my strip. You can see I've made a mark for where my seam allowance would be on each end. I want to start here. So I'm going to raise my presser foot. I'm going to get this under here, and I'll use a stiletto or a seam ripper to help me push it underneath. There we go. So I'm going to pull it through because I'm going to start on that line. Let me just pull it through. There we go. So I have the needles lined up with my seam allowance. I've dropped my blade. I'm going to put down that, my differential on 2, my longer stitch. I'm going to keep my fingers here to help encourage the gathers. I'm going to go till I hit this mark. Then I'm going to serge off. I'll probably have to unpick a few of the stitches. Can you see how it's already starting to gather? And then I'm going to come off. I'll leave a nice tail. And see how that has gathered? It's really done a nice job. This is my favorite way to gather. And then I would use my stylus and I'd pick up my needle thread. I can see that. As you can see, these tweezers work fine. I have my 2 threads and I can pull on those a little bit. And can you see how it gathers? This is so much quicker than the traditional method. I like it a lot more. So that is my favorite way of doing it. And see how quickly I got to a nice gather? That was crazy fast. I have gathered my first one, or I should say I've over gathered it. I just finished doing this one. And see how much shorter it is now that it's been through the gathering? It is pretty close to what I need. So let me just take a look. I'm going to put it up against the bottom tear and see where we are. Roughly, I need to pull it in another 6 inches. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to gather this. I'm going to distribute this a little more. Feel like I've got more even gathers from doing it this way. So I'll be careful not to pop my stitches as I pull it out a little bit. I'll get these to the right width so that they match the width of the first tier. And then I'm going to sew it into a loop. I'll pin it on, zhuzh it a little if I have to, and sew it around, serge it to finish it. And then all that's left is to do the edge stitching on the hem here. Now I will unfold this like I did on the sleeve hem when I sew this into a tube, and then it'll go right back into the memory fold. I think this is going to be super quick. So I'm going to do all of that and I'll come back. I'll show you the finished dress. And I'm going to look at my stash hub and see how many Violette Field Threads patterns I own. I wanted to show you an overhead shot of this so that you could see what I'm doing. I have made my gathers and I'm just lining it up to see my gathers are going to fit well with this. I have my seam allowance here. I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm going to sew my tube and then I will sew this right sides together. But let's have a close look here so you can see how I have done my gathering. Let me bring you in for a closer look. The white are my looper threads. And here's the coral, that's the showing up the best. There's also a dark green thread, and I pulled these, and I just pull so nicely and gather easily. When I sew this together, here. I'm going to be really conscious of where these serger threads are. Not so much the loopers, but my needle threads. And I'm going to not sew over them, so if I need to do a tiny adjustment, I can. If I do accidentally sew them, I can always come in here and pull a little bit. So it's not the end of the world. I can find needle threads and tug them. I think I've got a pretty good fit here. So I'm going to sew this close. Then I'm going to sew it around right sides together to the bottom of my first here. I will serge it. Then I'm going to edge stitch this. It'll fold right back neatly and do the same as my sleeve, and I will be done. I'm so happy with how this turned out. This is a size 2T. You can make a tween, you can make a woman's size, lots of matching moments, or if you just want to make it for yourself. Let me know if you sew the Maeve, and if you use any of the tips I've dropped throughout the video. I am going to leave information in the description box, also in the first pinned comment, and there will be some tutorials in the end cards that I think you'll find helpful.